So this is the second video on the fractal body and Antarctica. So in this video I'd like to explore this notion of value systems in relation to your body. And remember that I mentioned that the humans were primarily focused on the voice. Now the idea is we're spreading information, we're spreading memes from one person to the other. And although you can measure or kind of quantify development through different metrics, say cognition, morality, kinesthetic, Michael Jordan's kinesthetic ability through the roof, or mathematics, Stephen Hawking's mathematics ability. There's this neat system of thinking called spiral dynamics that maps value systems. I'm not saying this is the best metric to try to show these memetic spreadings, and I'm going to try to relate it back to the body later, but I think the nice thing about this system is it mimics the fractal pattern that I'm trying to express, and all those other systems have been shown that they can, roughly speaking, fit into this pattern, broadly speaking. So spiral dynamics was founded by a man named Claire W. Graves, and work was continued by a couple people named Don Beck and Chris Cohen, who later split. This work focuses on a 6-on-6 pattern, so it too has this kind of fractal notion, although its system is only of 2 fractals, really, and the second one is just kind of emerging. And I'll get into that later and add a new level of complexity that it doesn't have, hopefully. So remember I talked about the whole cosmic evolution and how that might have some fractal pattern. Now, smushed within that 5th system, which is the human system, broadly speaking, I'm saying that there's this 6-on-6 pattern in there, and then what's going to happen is the next system is going to have even denser fractals within the brow, as it were. So again, this is memetic. We're using language to express ideas, roughly speaking. And if you go back 100,000 years ago, and I'm not a huge believer in our present anthropological system. I think there's some interesting work being done there that suggests that we don't have our history exactly right, but it's probably fairly close in that 100,000 years ago, humans as they were probably quite focused on survival systems. So we might have been using very basic speech patterns, early memes as it were, to express survival needs. A couple grunts for fire, one grunt for making love, basic survival things that we needed to get done. But our language capacities were pretty primitive. As we move forward, so that's in spiral dynamics called the beige system. Move forward 50,000 years, thereabouts, maybe 100,000 years, we come into kind of a tribal system. Here we start to see probably music playing roles. I talked about this vital quality, and tribal cultures really seem to use herbs and so forth to enhance vitality. We even drugs like psilocybin probably to augment our consciousness and get in tune with the natural world. This notion of magic, as it were, where if you put on the face of the animal, you imbibe the vital energies of that animal, and you can kind of express it in the clan so that you can be a better hunter and so forth. And if you dance, you think it might rain. Causal things that aren't necessarily linked, but people are trying to make sense of it. So we're using new kinds of expression, song and ritual and dance to express ideas in a fairly primitive way. A language has not probably been fully fermented yet, but we're getting close here. And as we move forward into the kind of 10,000 years ago period, and it might stretch further back with our rearrangement of, like Graham Hancock's kind of work and so forth, that it might have been a little bit earlier than this, but, we get, and maybe even a bigger history, right? If there's aliens and so forth, which I'm open to. I'm not saying that's right or not, but, open to that. But we look at our history, and it seems that like the Mayan culture, the Aztec culture, the Egyptian culture, very hierarchical, power, I'm the king of the castle, you're the dirty rascal. We see this in potentially gang culture now. There's this sense of power over others, slave master kind of situations. And here we see really language starting to be formalized to some important sense, where we actually have writing patterns. We map out our thoughts onto some tablet or something, and it expresses a broad system of thought, theological, etc., mathematical, astrological, all these different things. And that formalization allows many different things, but early civilization to really grow in ways that was never possible within the tribal culture. So this is the third system. The fourth system, remember I was saying that third system, if you look back at my previous videos, saying there's kind of a pattern with reptiles. Again, there's this slave master, this kind of impulsive orientation to that. And then the fourth system I was mentioning that is kind of related to the heart. And this is where we see the great religious traditions start to open up. And, so long as you are in a common belief system under the law, quote unquote, the law of that tradition, you are saved, you are okay, and you can be my brother. And that's how that's, all the mythic traditions around the world tend to share that kind of similar, us versus them, but, sharing of bonds within the common belief structure. And this notion of transcendence, something bigger than oneself that you can reach towards. So that would be a fractal parallel to mammals, which in the human culture, remember this is voice-oriented, so we're creating essentially idea systems that mimic that. So it's the fifth system within the fourth context. Now, if there is such a thing as being in the most human domain, be the fifth system of the fifth system, which I'm talking about here is kind of the Industrial Revolution period, at least so far as we've seen it emerge on this planet. Might be different in different planets slightly, but I think you see in that, progress and sort of autonomy, freedom, equality, liberty. These are the principles that were the founding fathers were focused on, and all people are open so long as you follow these general principles. You can't quash other people's freedom of speech and right to bear arms in that cult. These sorts of things. Basic laws that so long as you follow, you can be part of that nation. And again, there's this kind of conveyor belts. Step 1, step 2, step 3. We see it in grade school. We see it in manufacturing and these sorts of things. Something that a lot of people that are of my age are, have a little bit of opposition to, and I'll maybe get to that in a bit. But in the 1960s, we see a new system emerge. This would be the sixth system within the fifth system, if that makes sense. And so the sixth system within the fifth system, and that has to do with pluralism. So the scientific model, like in the Kuhnian sense, was, is it raining outside? I've seen rain before, I'll go check. Okay, now I need to verify it. I say it's raining. This person who's seen rain, he checks, he sees it's raining. Okay, we can pretty much feel pretty confident it's raining. So that's the kind of scientific method. However, what the postmodern revolution kind of says is that what you are as a being is subject to culture. In many respects, where you grew up shapes the way you think. And that's relative in important ways. A person in Thailand, a person in India, a person in China, a person in Canada, we have very different cultures, and hence we think quite differently. So there's no easy way to say that this is a scientific observer, because if your culture has raised you quite differently, then what you say is true might differ from culture to culture. So in the extreme sense of relativism, it says there's no real better or worse truth. Everything is kind of relative. In a more broad sense, you're just making room for a pluralistic landscape. That's kind of the healthy version of it. And with each of these, there's more or less healthy patterns, and that's going to get back to the bigger context that I'm really talking about, health at all levels. Health at all levels will mean all these different fractals finding some sort of health. Then in the spiral dynamics model, there's something called a monumental leap in meaning. Now, we haven't arguably, or we're around the time of reaching this monumental leap in meaning if spiral dynamics is right. So that sixth system, started about 1960s, information revolution and these sorts of things. And the integral revolution is like a chameleon. And with this monumental leap, you can actually kind of step into all these previous systems when and if needed. So I can take in and respect the mythic cultures and actually see that part of me is integral. I have these elements that need lawfulness in my existence, and I need reason, and I need pluralism. I need all these different things, even magic in some ways, and I need to eat. These sorts of things in some ways. So the idea there is that these next systems are, again, a fractal on the previous one. So now survival is in a global context. We have all these different environmental issues, all these different problems, everybody knows them. And how we're going to face them is systemically managing all these different ways of thinking and trying to bring out the best in people that are able to be at whatever level they're at. You don't want to force them to be at a different level. The green system, the previous system, that sixth system, says everybody's right so long as you believe I'm right. But if you don't, you're wrong. This system says, okay, everybody is right, but they're right at the level that they're at, and there's ways of being more right. So, developing is actually a way of being more right. And the broad system of this sixth pattern, I'm saying that it's going to connect probably to a cyborg thing, in my opinion, might be wrong, and it's dangerous, and that gets later on into this, and I probably won't touch on that too much. But the next system would be turquoise, and it's related to vital stuff, in my opinion, again, if this pattern holds. And now a new spirituality and these sorts of things starts to open up, one in which we kind of recognize the broad connectivity that we are on this planet. We're all connected in some important sense. Our vital qualities all need to be met for this ecosystem to be healthy. Okay. Getting back to health, broadly speaking. So now we have these 6 major systems, and the physical systems, what our typical health system tends to address. If there's something wrong, we cut it out. We look at that kind of very base physiological issue. Whereas when you get into Indian health or these sorts of things, they really focus on the second system lots. Not entirely, actually they're quite holistic in many respects, but the second system is like herbal plants and so forth, whereas ours is more obscure chemicals, which sometimes work very well, sometimes don't, but the herbal traditions, we know it's integrated well with our body historically to some degree. There's thousands of years of history showing how well they've done or not, and we build a very systemic plan to help that second system of vitalogical health, as well as the first, if they can do it. Most of those Eastern cultures aren't as good, or historically not as good, at dealing with the kinds of cutting out processes that our Western culture does. If there's some immediate problem, we'll cut it out and we'll save the person's life. The third system would start to get into early psychosis, when the will starts to develop. So things like maybe Freudian technologies, Freudian techniques, and then into subtle energies, which we don't really have much knowledge with. That would be the fourth major system, and getting energies in play and so forth. And that might be something that this, if there is anything to this Antarctic thing, what that might be in play with. harmonizing. You can find that sort of stuff to some degree on the internet. Some of it's pretty woo-woo, and I'm not saying it's not. It seems very much that way. But Monroe has done some really interesting stuff with this kind of notion of projecting out of the body, and I mean, I've had some experiences that seem that way. So I'm very open to things along those lines. And then the pattern here, that would be kind of related to the dreaming state, lucid dreaming, these sorts of things. That's why I brought out out-of-body experiences. If this fifth system has this pattern, then it's related to the deep dreamless state. And some long-term meditators say, we can maintain awareness right through all phenomena into a witness state that witnesses all phenomena rising. That would be the fifth. And then the sixth, maybe, if there's anything to this, would be like non-dualism. So waking, or a sort of wakefulness through all states of consciousness, constant consciousness in some important sense. So healing of all those bodies would be holistic health practices, if that makes any sense. Be well.